First time since, of the popular vote, I should say. And that the last time that was done, I believe, was Woodrow Wilson as well.
So Joe, I think we should just make sure we keep time for some questions.
Sure, sure. Okay, so just to keep on pace with time, you know, we have the election of 2000, and some are likening that this election might turn out to be like 2000, where the first time since 1876, we would have the winner of the Electoral College fail to win the popular vote. And this, between the mess up with the election in Florida, this now lends us to a recount in Florida. And at first you have Gore, who did want to concede and then withdraws that concession. And this goes through the courts. And then finally, as the recount is happening, you saw Bush's lead narrowing little by little. And then the Supreme Court steps in and immediately halts any recounting and orders that the electoral votes go to George W. Bush, Bush 43. I think he won only by 271 electoral votes, which is a slim, slim margin. And he lost the popular vote by a little over 500,000 votes. 2004, John Kerry is the Democratic nominee. And there were some irregularities in Ohio with voting. And although that was not contested, President Bush, the incumbent, wins with only 286 electoral votes, I want to say. Now, in 2008, I call this Barack Obama's campaign a transformative campaign, because this was the first time that we see, first off, social media was fairly new at this time. And this was the time in which social media was heavily used to get the vote out. And we saw 18 to 29 demographic coming out in ways they had not come out in maybe 30 or 40 years to vote for the president. And Barack Obama was able to capitalize on, you had 8 years of the war on terror. You had a financial crisis in the last year of, you know, an 8-year stretch of George W. Bush as president, a Republican administration. And in October, the Dow dropped 777 points, which would then mark the beginning of the Great Recession that would lead us into 2008. The election of Barack Obama, though, once he is elected, you would have Mitch McConnell come out and say that their job would be to make Barack Obama one-term president. And in the midst of this recovery, once the Republicans took back the House in 2010 and then would eventually take the Senate back a few years later, Barack Obama would just be roadblocked at every turn. And some of the legislation that he did want to enact, some of it was designed to really help get us out of this recession quicker. He was just roadblocked. And I think from 2008 on, we begin to see the divisions that are now really coming to the surface today. I think it was the seeds had been planted long before, but the election of Barack Obama started seeing those divisions really come to the surface and leading us to where we are today.
I think we should.
Yeah, I don't want to go any further. I do want to open. I think
that's a good place to stop. And I want to jump in with the first question. Are current attempts at voter suppression unusual in American electoral politics? Already the Republicans have filed 300 lawsuits, or has it happened regularly? I come at this as someone who specializes in early American history. So my view of this is, you know, the suppression was rampant, but that's in an era when people had to quite often vote publicly. There were no hidden ballots, or not every state had private ballots. You voted in person, so voter intimidation was an everyday occurrence. But what I would say more generally in response to that question, to bring it back to what I was trying to communicate at the beginning, is I think narratives of American history that are very rose-tinted and give the impression that America was has this democratic spirit and this kind of automatic commitment to democracy, sometimes hides, or often hides, the difficulties that voters have to have the vote. There's a sort of so voter suppression. My guess is it is quite significant in modern politics.
Mm-hmm.
Though I don't know if the way in which the Republicans are currently filing lawsuits, that seems to me to be something very new, a new strategy. But the sort of broader attempt to suppress votes and to gain a winning margin by suppressing votes, I think is quite well established. I suspect in modern US history, but certainly going well back into US history. What are your thoughts, Joe?
This is a very good question. I would agree with you, John. I also think just in the last couple of weeks, we've heard some crazy things coming out about voter suppression. You even had a Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, come out and say that any mail-in ballots or absentee ballots that arrive day of or just after Election Day, even though they might be postmarked, shouldn't be counted. You had the Postmaster General going before Congress being questioned about why is he taking machines offline that are designed to, deliver these mail-in ballots quicker. And you can argue that is a form of voter suppression. I don't think these attempts are unusual. I think there have always been attempts of voter suppression. I just think with the advancements of technology, and we can even get to the social media aspect of it, we can even have a whole new discussion on that at some point. But I think voter suppression's there, just the methods change as the ability changes to cast a vote. Now we're doing more mail-in ballots, and as you're seeing, taking machines offline that are designed to get the mail out quicker, I would argue is definitely a form of voter suppression, just a different method of doing it.
Yeah, and poll tests and literacy tests are, of course, a form of voting suppression. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was really an attempt to reduce voter suppression. It was an attempt to support positively through the law people's rights to vote. And there are calls now for another Voting Rights Act to address issues of voting suppression that are evident at the moment.
Another thing that's interesting that we're now seeing come to surface, I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but I guess I'll just call it voter persuasion, right? With the dawn of creating these enormously powerful algorithms to sift through data, we're seeing data analytics being used in a way that can target specific people on social media, that based on what they click into on social media, based on their browsing history, you can determine whether or not that specific individual or a group of individuals are persuadable or not in having their positions change on who they want to vote for. And, this was going back just a couple of years with that company, Cambridge Analytica,
Mm-hmm.
who was taking Facebook data. They created some enormous algorithms to see who would be persuadable and who wouldn't be, and then handing that stuff off to arguably the Trump campaign of 2016. And then you would start seeing these ads popping up on social media that weren't so much designed to make President Trump look like the better candidate, but to kind of discredit the other candidate. And that's something that I think we're going to be seeing more and more on display in future elections. The power the social media has is enormous.
So we have another question that's thrown out to everybody in the audience, I think, not just us. Thoughts about Electoral College in the 2020 presidential election. So if you have a view on that, put it in chat. What are your thoughts about the Electoral College, Joe?
Well, if you're watching mainstream media, they're talking about maybe the Electoral College is outdated. I will say this, though. if Vice President Joe Biden polls 3 to 4 million more popular votes than President Trump, but happens to lose the Electoral College, can our republic really sustain itself if this really isn't truly reflecting the will of the people anymore? I mean, because the implications of this, look, out of the last 7 elections, Republicans have only won the popular vote once, yet Republican presidents in the last 20 years or so have appointed more Supreme Court justices than Democrats. And I don't know what the implications of this are going to be. I don't know where I really stand on the Electoral College and 2020.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think there's ramifications of removing the Electoral College that people aren't fully thinking through. But there's a fundamental, I guess the fundamental argument for changing the Electoral College is, why should somebody who votes in Wisconsin have so much more influence? Their vote counts because Wisconsin has 3 Electoral College votes and a very small population. Why should it count so much more towards the Electoral College than somebody who votes in New York or California?
Right. Interesting question here from Tasha Kimball. Regarding the relatively and apparently longstanding low levels of voter participation in the US, is there research on people's attitudes towards voting in the past? What have been the central reasons that US historians think participation is relatively low in this country? Have these reasons changed over time? This is a very interesting question. I can tell you